Hello and welcome. Today we're doing my first React video. We're going to be looking at Adam Neely's video on TikTok and dissonance. So let's go ahead and jump right in. I'm Dr. Zach. Grab a cup of tea and join me. All right, so the title of this is TikTok and Dissonance Do Not Mix. Let's first listen to what Adam Neely has to say.
So does this harmony sound good to you? That seems like a subjective question, but for many people on TikTok, the answer is no. And the reason for that is probably because the girl on the left is singing an E natural on top of a C minor chord. E flat is the third of C minor, which violently clashes with the E natural and the harmony, so you get a very dissonant sour interval, which explains people's negative reactions, right? Well, the story of why some people like this harmony and why some people don't like this harmony is strange and rather unfortunate because the girl on the left was harassed for posting a fun and harmless TikTok video of her singing. The lesson that we can take from this is that Western European polyphonic aesthetics are being relentlessly upheld as what is good.
Whoa, hold on. That was a lot right there. Western European polyphonic, harmonic. What were all those words that you just said? Man, this sounds like a person trying to write a thesis for their school paper and just threw in every word they knew.
The lesson that we can take from this is that Western European polyphonic.
Okay, Western European, that's right. That's our kind of classical music idiom. Polyphonic, meaning that there's more than one voice. Although this isn't really polyphonic because the duet is moving along one note to one note. So there is some counterpoint there, if you know that term. But really it's homophonic, all right? Because polyphonic would mean that the duet is doing something completely different. It sounds like its own separate voice. But let's keep listening here.
Aesthetics are being relentlessly upheld as what is good.
Okay. And then the aesthetics, meaning like whether or not you value it as something that's beautiful, right, is being relentlessly upheld as something that's good. I think the quotes are very, very well deserved there. But if you notice, we had the E flat and then the E natural clash that he mentioned. That is something that happens in Stravinsky. And Stravinsky is a Western European classical composer. And he isn't just the only case either of this happening. Like, I understand what Adam Neely is trying to say here. Kind of harmonic practices that were established in the Baroque era, really. And maybe even going a little bit earlier than that in the Renaissance era. That those kind of counterpoint practices and what's considered dissonance or not is what we're kind of basing what sounds good. Because the other thing that happens a lot with E flat and E natural, like common jazz idiom, you can have those what they call split thirds, right? So you have the major third C to E and the minor third C to E flat in the same chord. So this is a common Western musical, European, if you want to throw that in, tradition. So it's kind of interesting that this is where he started, but let's keep on listening.
Or correct on social media.
Correct.
Let's get into it.
So yeah, it is important to note that, remember, in music, there are no rules. There are rules you can follow to evoke a certain style or genre, and certainly there were treatises written about the rules of music over time. But we live in an age where really there are no rules. If you come up with something that you like and you think sounds good, you can just do it. Because it's art, right? It's subjective. If you think that it's, something that expresses what you want to express, then you can do it. There's no rules to say one way or the other. So
I posted a video of her singing the first couple of lines of As the World Caves In, a very beautiful melody written by Matt Maltese. On May 15th, the user 50 Shades of Swag duetted the original TikTok, adding a harmony which a lot of people really negatively reacted to. She was inundated with negative comments, but many people came to her defense saying that the dissonance was the point of the harmony. Maybe a little bit too smugly, though. A lot of the defense basically came down to, you just don't have the palate to appreciate dissonance like I do, which...
Yeah, that's another thing, right? So it is possible that the first time you hear a piece of music, you don't like it. And then the more you listen to it, maybe especially if it has a lot of these harsh dissonances, the more you listen to it, the more you go, oh, and you start to kind of appreciate it. Same thing goes with like a lot of 12 tone or serial music. At first, you might think this is a bunch of garbage. I don't like it at all. If you think 12 tone music is garbage, I recommend looking up Dalla Piccola. I'll leave a link in the description for some of Dalla Piccola stuff. He is 12 tone. Now, it's not strict 12 tone for those of you who know the difference, but the music is absolutely beautiful. And there's a way, to learn about 12 tone music and really come to appreciate it if you spend the time to do that. But kind of the average person wouldn't really, take a liking to it right away. So I understand where like these other people are coming from, but also it is kind of elitist to just be like, well, you don't understand the harmony. So I also don't really like that. I do kind of side with Adam Neely here, how he seems like that is just not a great argument in general. And let's see if we kind of gets into more of like how we can understand what's happening in the duet here on TikTok.
Is not particularly helpful. Regardless, 50 Shades of Swag is not to blame here and does not deserve the harassment for posting her art. It's worth mentioning that as the world caves in, as a melody is difficult to harmonize into part harmony.
I also doubt that. There is, I think, always a way you can harmonize something. It probably won't sound right, especially if you really know the song, because it'll just sound like it's supposed to be by itself in what we call a monophonic line, right? A single line. But there's always a way to harmonize something. I mean, go and look up any cover of a song that you like, and the harmonies are probably going to be different, even if the line was originally that monophonic single line. There's a way, there's like basically an infinite way that you can harmonize something.
Maltese's original doesn't actually have any vocal harmony attached to it. The melody emphasizes the third of the key of G major, B, as the chords change underneath it. We start on a C major chord, the 4 chord in the key of G major, but then we go to a C minor chord, which is the 4 minor, borrowed from the parallel G minor. This 4 to 4 minor, C to C minor, has like such a bittersweet affect to it. Part of the reason for that is because the E flat of C minor is the flat 6 in the key of G, what I've been calling the nostalgia note, because it's a note that's used in harmony very frequently in cadences from popular song of the early 20th century.
Nostalgia.
It reminds us of a time gone by. What's very cool though, and interesting about...
Okay, just a quick note here. Music can mean different things to different people. He is establishing this as like a nostalgia note, and you could probably use that note in the exact same way and get that kind of feeling, but there's probably countless other examples where that isn't the feeling you get from that note. Remember, this goes back to there are no rules in music. Like there are these generalities we can make about, oh yes, the flat 6 kind of brings this nostalgic feeling, but only if it's in the right context, right? Like he said, he even specified that kind of like early pop music and had the Christmas scene, right? And that like nostalgia, you kind of get that nostalgic feeling, but that's all due to the context, right? There's so much more that can go into whether or not a particular scale degree sounds the way it does. So anyways, let's keep listening.
This melody in particular is that the melody keeps hitting the note B natural from G major. So on the C minor chord, you're getting that dark pull of the E flat, while the melody is this bright B, the major third. There's like a pull.
So he doesn't go into it, and I'm not sure how relevant this is either, but that's what we would call a minor major 7th chord, because there's a minor chord on the bottom and then there's a major 7th up top. And the chord right before this was the major 7th chord, because we had a major chord, C major, plus the major 7th, that B up top. And I'm sure he knows all this and probably just was simplifying the theory for kind of the general public here. Technically, like that C major 7th chord is already a bit dissonant. And then when we add that minor chord to the bottom, so it becomes a minor major 7th chord, then that just adds like a little bit more dissonance. So if we went from just a C major chord, which isn't dissonant, and then we just went straight into a minor major 7th chord, that would be a huge shock. Whereas here, the dissonance is kind of being introduced slowly, right? You first get the C major with the major 7th, so there's that little bit of dissonance, a little bit of tension, and then you just kind of cranked it up a little bit more by adding the C minor chord underneath. Okay, let's keep on going.
in opposite directions that you feel when you hear the singer sing that B natural on Lie With. Good stuff. This gives us problems, though, when we go and try and harmonize the melody.
Resolution of tension.
When we harmonize melodies, what we're doing is we're trying to find some sense of balance between two voices. And that sense of balance might be a little bit different from culture to culture. Like, consider Bulgarian choral singing, for example.
It's cool.
This stuff
Yeah,
is
it is cool.
This stuff is awesome. It's so beautiful. It's so resonant and strong. The intervals between the voices are so powerful, and you get intervals that don't normally occur in Western popular music, like that flat 2 there. It's like,
Western popular music, flat 2. Beethoven used flat 2. I think Mozart used flat 2. I know in the Moonlight Sonata, first movement, there's a flat 2 in like the opening phrase. So flat 2 isn't like super new and exciting. You just see that popular music has kind of phased it out, as it were. But even then, like, you can find it in some examples. Whereas like other folk traditions have kept flat 2 as something that happens. So anyways, let's keep on going.
so good, so good. Singers who have ears that have been acclimated to popular music in the West will generally gravitate towards different kinds of intervals, though. If you have a melody and you're trying to sing along with it in harmony, your ear will naturally gravitate towards the note that's either 3 notes away, 4 notes away, 5 notes away, or 6 notes away from the melody note in whatever key that you're singing.
Okay, so I understand his point a little bit better. He's saying that if all you've ever really listened to is like Western popular music, then these would be your most common harmony notes, which is true, I think. I think that's a fair point to make. Fourths, maybe not so much. In fact, in traditional counterpoint, a fourth is considered a dissonance. So I think thirds and sixths, definitely. Fifths are now, of course, becoming more popular. If you've ever taken a music theory class, you know 2 fifths in a row is supposed to be like the end all be all. You can't do it, but it's so common in popular music nowadays. Okay, anyways, let's continue.
These are what we call the consonant intervals. This contrasts.
See, here, consonant intervals. That fourth is technically a dissonance, all right? If you're taking a music theory class, don't write a fourth unless you prepare and resolve it correctly, because it is not a consonant interval, it's a dissonant interval.
With the dissonant intervals like the second and the seventh, which generally are not used to harmonize melodies, at least with a one-to-one rhythmic relationship. This relationship, by the way, is called first species counterpoint. More on that later. Now, usually Western singers will harmonize thirds and sixths.
Okay, this is my problem too. Like, he is talking about first species counterpoint, right? And he's using this kind of advanced technical musical term. And if we're gonna go to the land of counterpoint, like, we should be in the land of counterpoint here. Yes, it is counterpoint. I guess the way that the melody is being harmonized is first species, but in like first species counterpoint, there's only the 2 voices. And in the song that we're listening to, there's other harmony going on underneath it. So I don't really think it would qualify as like actual first species counterpoint. It just seems strange that he would use that term when it's not really what's happening. I mean, you can say counterpoint. I mean, counterpoint happens basically anytime you have 2 voices. That's fine. But yeah, that's just kind of strange to me that he would go that far to include the word first species. So I don't know. He said we'll have more about it later, so we'll see what he has to say here. I do agree with what's on the screen right now that says fourths and fifths are less common. That's what I was kind of saying earlier. Remember, fourths are technically a dissonance, although not really, because remember, there's no rules. But then, of course, the fifths are less common. So let's see here.
And not fourths and fifths. So if 50 Shades of Swag were to harmonize As the World Caves in thirds, it would sound something like this.
So for me, first impressions, it just sounds like, has a little bit of like a sweeter quality. Again, that's my perception. Some of you might just thought it sounded like good, but what I want you to push is to like why you think it sounds good versus the other one. Right, the other one, it really had so much more tension. I'm not sure if you really remember it from the beginning, But like this one, there's just not as much tension. That's really the difference between the two. And whether or not you think that sounds good, again, kind of is up to you, what you've listened to, your personal experience, what kind of aesthetics you enjoy, whether or not, of course, you'd be open to like trying to experience some of this stuff. So like for me, there's just a sweeter sound to this. That's how I kind of experience it. And like that's a completely different affect, right, than what we got from before. So if that's, I mean, the line I think we just heard, the atom bomb locks in. Like, I don't know the whole song, so maybe this is like a sweet gesture, but tension around the atom bomb would make a lot of sense. So anyways, here we go.
It's pretty good, but there are some interesting problems in there. On the phrase lie with, the melody travels from a B to an A. So a third down from B and A is a G and an F sharp. The combination of the chord tones C, E flat, and G with the harmony of the singers F sharp and A yields a particularly spicy harmony that might not sit well with everybody's stomach.
That's silly. Okay, I'm sorry, that is silly. Because I think you could hear it when he played the C minor and then he played the other two notes above it, it sounded fine. And then when he played them all as a cluster, it didn't sound fine. So this comes down to what we call voicing, where you place the notes in the chord. Because this like F sharp and A, yeah, they don't belong, quote unquote, to the C minor chord, but we have this all the time in music where you get what's called non-chord tones and they resolve, right? They go to another note that then you get that tension from the non-chord tone and then the release finally landing on the chord tone. So to like isolate this one part of the measure and be like, oh, this is a C minor 6 sharp 11, isn't really doing us any favors, I don't think. And if we look at this a different way, like if we really want to get into it, this could be F sharp A, C, E flat, which is a fully diminished 7th chord. And then we have the G on top, which then would be like kind of an added tone.
You won't naturally gravitate towards thirds when you're singing along to As the World Caves In. So 50 Shades of Swag didn't sing in thirds. So what about sixths? What would that sound like?
I like that less.
This one actually works pretty well, and what I think I personally would gravitate towards if I was going to try and sing harmony with the melody. And this one is the one that's cited.
Really? Okay, but here's the thing. Okay, so he's just about to say this is the one that is cited as the correct harmonies, which again, there's no such thing as like a correct harmony, which he isn't saying. I know he's not saying that, but a lot of other people have this kind of impression. And then parentheses, you see mostly in sixths. Because the one that he did, I did not like that very well. I preferred the one in thirds much better. Again, maybe you preferred the one in sixths. That's fine. Like, that's you. That's me preferring the other one, and that's art. That's what makes it so wonderful when we can talk about it, have a discussion. So let's keep listening.
In a TikTok as being the correct harmony, whatever that might be. You generally hear singers who are singing by ear gravitate towards thirds and sixths when they're working within popular music. Those intervals just kind of work within the style. This intuitive gravity towards those intervals in Western music was codified in a treatise written in 1725 by Johann Fuchs, Gradus ad Parnassum, Steps to Parnassus. This counterpoint textbook that many classical composers studied out of, like Mozart and Beethoven, attempted to codify the 16th century polyphonic style of the Italian composer Palestrina into a series of rules and guidelines for composers who wanted to make good sounding harmony, whatever that might mean. It was and continues to be an immensely useful guide for that style of music.
And what we just listened to was homophonic. All right, going back to those terms from earlier, you heard like, it wasn't quite homophonic because there was like a little bit of a melody line that was different from that one section. So maybe there's other parts of that piece that are polyphonic where you hear multiple independent voices. That's the main thing, is you hear independent voices in polyphonic music. And that's true. Palestrina wrote a lot of polyphonic music, but like the music that we are accustomed to listening to from Mozart and Beethoven isn't always polyphonic. Like if you want a true example of like a polyphonic Mozart piece, look up Jupiter Symphony fourth movement, there's this really awesome fugue, if you know what a fugue is, in that you hear the individual voices, I think, really well. And it's, of course, this amazing piece if you have a chance to look up more about it too. But let's keep going.
Early on in the book, you can see that this tendency to always go towards thirds and sixths as intervals for harmony between two voices has existed in Western Europe for many hundreds of years. Not in Bulgaria, by the way. They use a different aesthetic over there for that style of singing. But in popular music and on TikTok, the harmonic aesthetic of Palestrina reigns supreme. Now, the young lady in the TikTok in question, instead of singing a harmony mostly in sixths, she sang it predominantly focused on fifths. Fifths are okay, but carry with them some problems. This is what she's saying.
I think this last part in particular is really effective. How you have the unison, they come together, and then she stays on the G while the melody goes up to the third, and then she stays on the G again and then comes back down to the F sharp. And that like continuation of the G across there is, I mean, it's this kind of traditional writing that he's talking about. But since that's kind of what our style of music evolved from, like it really feels powerful to have that held note go across and then finally resolve down to the F sharp.
Now, some people were reacting negatively to things besides the notes that she was singing. Like, for example, she's singing with very wide vowels. She's not really blending with Sarah Cothran in this.
I agree with that.
The timbres are not really locked together. Contrary to...
I actually think that's the problem that people have with this. It's not so much the harmony. It's that I feel like the duet person is singing almost in like a belting kind of tone, which is a specific style that is completely, valid. But it's not matching the tone of the original one. And so when people hear those two different kind of styles of singing clashing against each other, I feel like that's really what people are finding unsettling rather than the dissonance. Because like I've kind of said, this dissonance isn't groundbreaking. It's probably not even something that people haven't heard before. I think what really is throwing people is a combination of the dissonant notes along with kind of this like what we call timbral or color dissonance between the two singers, because they're both singing in kind of these different styles of singing. So I think that's really what the kind of offense that some people have been taking to this. And as I said, there's nothing wrong with how either one of them are singing, but they're just not really blending together.
To what some people might have thought, she's actually singing the notes fairly in tune if you take a look at the isolated audio track. But some bigger problems arise when you take a look at the notes themselves, not whether or not they are in tune with our Western tuning system. For example, on the phrase lie with, the melody is B to A, and a perfect fifth down from B is an E natural. Chord is a C minor chord, and E just, it sounds like this. It's a very sour sound. When two notes of different accidentals combine like this, like E flat and E natural, you get something called a cross relationship. Cross relationships are very, very crunchy, and in fact, composers like Igor Stravinsky use them quite frequently for that maximum crunch effect. But even if you don't have those underlying chords, like the backing track that the two singers are singing with, that might have that crunchy relationship, that cross relationship between E and E flat, even if you don't have to worry about that, the choice to harmonize a melody with all fifths is a little bit of an odd one. Because of how stable and how powerful the perfect fifth interval is, when we harmonize two voices in perfect fifths, it ends up sounding like the lower voice is the more important one, because the upper voice is in a perfect fifth relationship down to the lower one.
I agree with this. And there's a scientific reasoning for it. If you've ever studied the harmonic series, after the octave, the first interval is a perfect fifth. And this is, right, so you have your fundamental pitch. This is the one that you hear. In this case, like he's playing a C. And then he has the G above it. Well, that G is the third note in that harmonic series. We have C, we have another octave C, and then the G is here. So when you play them together, that G just kind of blends in. I mean, it's part of kind of the fabric of the lower note. So what he's saying, I think, really is accurate, that when you have the fifths going up and down, you kind of just lose the top note because it fits in that kind of harmonic series from the fundamental note, which is the lower note.
That becomes a problem because, of course, the melody should be the more important one. The upper voice is like the melody of the song. Perfect fifths are very low on the harmonic series, and if you need a primer on the harmonic series, Andrew Huang's got you covered, but basically notes physically vibrate and resonate with each other more if they're in simple mathematical relationships with one another. And a perfect fifth is a very simple and very powerful mathematical relationship. If you have two voices going perfect fifth, perfect fifth, perfect fifth, one after another, you don't get the sense that the upper voice is the more important one.
Right, and the reason why it doesn't feel more important is because it's blending into the fundamental note, the note that's below it. Whereas if you have a note that isn't an octave or a fifth, that occurs higher up in the spectrum of the harmonic series, and so you can more easily kind of distinguish like what is happening.
Ruining that sense of harmony and ruining that sense of balance. You may have heard the phrase, don't use parallel fifths before, right? It's like the cardinal sin of music theory. It's like the first thing that you learn when you go to music school and take a music theory class. Yes. Never use parallel fifths. How dare you? Parallel fifths bad. Of course, the first thing that everybody thinks when they encounter this rule for the first time is, well, f you. No, I like the sound of parallel fifths. I'm going to use parallel fifths all the time, and there's nothing that you can do about it. And, you know, there's a good reason for that, because parallel fifths are very important in power chords, in rock harmony. Power chords are nothing but parallel fifths. And, you know, the amazing harmony of, like, Duke Ellington would be absolutely impossible without some degree of parallel intervals. Like, parallel fifths are just... Honestly, you'll find them in music from around the world, and you'll also find it in a lot of pop music from today. Like David Bowie's Black Star, he's singing in parallel fifths, and it sounds awesome. Like what?
Okay, a couple comments. When David Bowie was singing, he was singing the lower note, that fundamental that we're talking about, so that's why it works a little bit better. Second thing, when you go to music school and you're taught that parallel fifths are bad, you are learning to write in a specific style. That's what you're learning. You're not learning, like I said, the rules of music that tell you if you have a parallel fifth where the fifths, you know, you just have all these fifths in succession, that's bad music. No, it's inappropriate for the style. That's all it is. It's inappropriate for the style. And if you're trying to learn to write in a style, you need to know what is appropriate and what's not appropriate. So like he's saying, these days, like perfect fifths, who cares? I speculate that other cultures had perfect fifths in succession when, you know, Bach was writing music and avoiding perfect fifths. Even then, though, if you want to get really specific, Bach sometimes has perfect fifths next to each other, which is technically breaking the rule. But like I said, there's no rules in music. So anyways, let's keep going.
What an incredibly powerful and haunting vocal performance, something that's no doubt aided by the fact that David Bowie is using parallel fifths, going contrary to the common wisdom of Palestrina and Fuchs. So why the hate here? Why was 50 Shades of Swag harassed for using this kind of harmony which doesn't necessarily conform to that style of European polyphonic singing? You know, users on TikTok were not citing an 18th century rule on no parallel fifths to justify the harassment. No, they were just saying that the music sounded bad. And without interrogating themselves on why they felt the music sounded bad, they were, in effect, without realizing it, enforcing European standards for polyphonic aesthetics that were established many hundreds of years ago by Johann Fuchs and Palestrina, like no parallel fifths and thirds and sixths are good. In other words, the style from many hundreds of years ago is the one that's correct. There's, of course, the misogyny at play here, too. This is a young woman who did not conform to what her peer group demanded of her, and as such, she was ostracized for it and relentlessly dogpiled. If something isn't for you, that's okay. And if something doesn't conform to the aesthetics of Johann Fuchs, that's okay too. And
it's kind of like what I was saying earlier about how the melody in thirds sounded like sweet to me, and I like that better than the melody in sixths. Well, you might like the melody in sixths better, and that's fine, right? And it really is too bad that this person got dogpiled on, because there's just no reason for it. It's just a difference in tastes, it's a difference in harmony and aesthetics. Like, that's a shame. It really is.
In the time since listening to this TikTok for the first time, I've come to actually really like it. You know, in addition to the parallel fifths thing, she's not like...
You might find that the more you listen to it, the more you're like, oh, that doesn't actually sound so bad, right? It's just that initial like exposure to it. Like I said, I think if the tone matched that timbre, or the color, right, matched between the two singers better, that this might not have ever been an issue. I don't know.
Blending that well with the melody, but as the user Chicken Thighs mentions, that actually might be a good thing. It feels like they're singing to each other, not together, and I like that idea way more.
Oh, girl, it's you that I lie with as the atom love.
Nice.
You know, young people demand conformity, and music is a powerful cultural tool for enforcing it. It's easy to say that something sounds bad, but harder to come up with a justification why you feel it sounds bad.
Exactly. What
And
is it that
harder
makes you
still
feel?
to figure out why you selected that particular justification to confirm your own biases. In this case, some people on TikTok think that the music might sound bad because it's going against the grain for Western harmony and the rules of Western European music established several hundred years ago. Not Bulgarian music, mind you, Western European music. This wasn't always the case, by the way, in Western music. You know, Gregorian chant was based on fourth and fifth harmony. And of course, there are many folk styles of singing that rely on parallel fifth harmonization, like, you know, sea shanties, for example, while we're on the TikTok trend.
All right, so that was pretty much the end. Yeah, so, I mean, I think I made a lot of my thoughts clear on this one. Like, yeah, like, it's a different harmony. I think some of his, like, choices of explaining things was kind of interesting. Why he, like, for example, decided to say Firstspecies counterpoint. And he even kind of tried to get into that a little bit later, but I don't think the point was really that strong. He tried to mention not using parallel fifths, but then he showed examples of people using parallel fifths, which I think was supposed to undermine the fact that counterpoint states you can't have parallel fifths. Yeah, we still see it frequently, and I agree with that, and that's like perfectly fine. But I'm not sure why he like laid out his argument with this emphasis on counterpoint when his kind of end result was that the counterpoint doesn't really matter much anymore, which is true, but his point is also that like we use thirds and sixths so much because of this old counterpoint. So I don't know. Kind of an interesting video. I hope you all enjoyed. Please remember to like and subscribe. If you like this type of video, let me know in the comments. I can do a few more. If you have any videos you'd like me to react to, I'd love to know. So thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time.